Cyberpunk 2077 just got a new update. This is patch 2.0, the near comprehensive overhaul of the game. It'll be about a 50GB download on consoles, but a bit smaller at just 25GB on Steam. And the reason this update's so large is it overhauls just about everything. There are very few systems this update doesn't impact, and in this video I'll give you a rundown of just about all of them, including the single most important change to come earlier today, where you can now untrack quests in Cyberpunk 2077. But if you somehow don't own Cyberpunk 2077, you're thinking about jumping in now, or even you haven't pre-ordered Phantom Liberty yet, you can pick up both on GOG using my affiliate link down below. So when jumping into this overhauled experience, CDPR does recommend starting a new game. I've seen a lot of people debating whether or not to do that, and although it isn't required, one of the big reasons for this recommendation is just because basically everything's different. One of the biggest changes you'll feel with patch 2.0 is the comprehensive overhaul of the perk and skill system. And that is a pretty important distinction that I think a lot of people are missing. Not only were perks completely reworked with this update, but skills were too. Previously, skills were assigned to each of the various perk trees and would reflect the abilities of that tree. But now instead, there's going to be a few fundamental skills that roughly reflect certain playstyles. So for example, Headhunter is largely going to be the sharpshooter, Shinobi is the fast-moving swordsman, Solo is the tank, and so on. There's no exact description on how to level these up, or at least I couldn't find one in-game, but just by roughly going into these playstyles, you'll find these skills increasing. So getting into some close quarters combat with a shotgun had my Solo skill increasing, but taking out enemies from afar with a scoped weapon increased Headhunter. And a lot of the time, after you do have an extended combat encounter, you'll notice several skills getting leveled up. And that's pretty important because a lot of these new skills can be very powerful. Every 5 levels, you're going to get some kind of bonus from it. Early on, these are going to be pretty simple, just really stat bonuses or a couple of extra perk points, but towards the middle and end, some of these skills will give you much larger bonuses, like all healing items being more effective and healing you more, or even new abilities tied to cyberware or perks, so when you use cyberware, you'll have new functionality around that. Overall, I really like the skill change as it favors a more natural play in a certain style. So over time, as you naturally fall into certain play styles, you'll gradually increase the skills associated with them and get even better abilities for that play style. But far more impactful will be the attribute and perk changes. If you do load the 2.0 update with an existing save, you will have a one-time opportunity to reset all of your attribute points. You'll find this option right from the character menu, and this is pretty nice because you'll always have a one-time use of this. It'll always just be there. You can use it right off the bat if you are using an existing save, or just try out some builds and then use this later on to do a completely different build path. And attributes in Cyberpunk 2077 are now much simpler. For example, the body attribute used to give you all of these various bonuses, but now it's just a +2 to your max HP per level. This will apply to all of the various attributes, but the bigger change is going to be when it comes to perks, because yeah, it's all just different. Basically, every single perk in Cyberpunk 2077 has been changed. And within this, there's going to be some larger overarching changes that are definitely worth highlighting. Perk trees are now unified under one attribute, so instead of having several different perk trees under a given attribute, now it's all just connected. But what you will notice is access to certain perks is restricted. First, you're going to need to spend a certain number of attribute points to unlock sections of the perk tree. This is really straightforward. 4 points will be section 1, 9 points for section 2. Although something that is notable is to get to the highest tier of perks, you will need to spend 20 attribute points maxing out an attribute. In the past, you only needed 18, but now you do need the full 20 points to get the highest tier perks. As well as the perk tree itself is interconnected. Perks will follow paths now, and to get better perks, you must unlock the perk prior to it on its path. And specifically, you have to unlock all levels of that perk. So you can see here, to get this higher tier perk, I first must unlock all of the levels of the one that precedes it. And for some of the highest tier legend perks, you may need to fully unlock 2 separate perks to actually get the powerful one. Perk levels are now going to be pretty important. Many of these mid-tier perks will give you some kind of new ability, but not immediately. So with many of them, you actually have to get into level 3, which of course will require 3 perk points to get that new ability. And just generally, as you're looking at this menu, the larger perk icons are perks that do grant you new abilities, while the smaller ones are mostly stat bonuses. A lot of these little branching perks will be enhancements to whatever the larger perk in the center is. And although this may seem kind of confusing and overwhelming to just dive into, especially because of how different it is than what we had previously, now at any point you can just refund whatever perks you unlocked and respec them freely. You may notice some perks don't have the refund option immediately, but that's just because you must first refund perks that are further down the tree. Unfortunately though, attributes are fully locked outside of that one-time reset. But yeah, with patch 2.0 you can have fully dynamic builds on the perk side. You can unlock a perk, mess around with it for 20 minutes, and then realize, oh, I hate this, and just immediately refund it. And one of the big parts about this new perk tree is a lot of these perks are now going to hook into fundamentally reworked mechanics, such as both grenades and healing items now being infinite but with a cooldown. So when it comes to healing items or grenades, you're going to only need one copy of them. You'll only ever need to craft one grenade, and you will have an infinite quantity but with a short cooldown in between uses. These smaller numbers reflect how many charges of that item you have available, and after you use all of your charges, it'll take some time for it to fill back up. Sprinting around in Cyberpunk is no longer going to cost stamina, but firing your weapon does require stamina. And as you can imagine, there's going to be a ton of perks and skills that affect this, making that recharge time faster or even giving you the ability to store more charges at once. Particularly on the healing side, with healing items now having a cooldown and you can't just spam them endlessly, there are a lot of perks I imagine a lot of players are going to want to be taking to make this aspect of the game easier. As well as now nearly every quick hack in the game has been reworked somewhat, and many of them now have synergies. One of the intelligence perks allows you to queue up and effectively stack quick hacks on enemies. For example, using contagion and then overheat will make enemies explode, which is incredibly strong. Or alternatively, using cyberware malfunction into short circuit deals bonus damage to enemies. And with some quick hacks, uploading multiple of the same quick hack at one time will actually give you unique bonuses that way. So really the perk and skill tree is a multifaceted overhaul. Everything's changed now, but even further, many of those fundamental features of Cyberpunk have also been reworked and now have new perks impacting how exactly they do work. Like, to be a relevant netrunner, you'll almost certainly need this quick hack stacking perk. Otherwise, you're just going to really cripple yourself before you even get started. And an even more extreme example of this is Cyberware, which is completely different now. Upon loading into update 2.0, you're going to get a new quest to talk to Vic. It's going to text you all about some of the recent Cyberware overhauls. And on a fundamental level, Cyberware has two new mechanics associated with it: capacity and armor. The big yellow bar on the left-hand side reflects your Cyberware capacity. This is just basically how much Cyberware you're able to equip at a given time. Some of the best Cyberware is going to use a lot of this bar, and you're going to have to make choices about what you want equipped or not. You can of course boost up this capacity, and it'll happen naturally as you level up, or more directly you can boost it up with certain perks, or even more specific types of Cyberware will increase your capacity. And there's honestly a ton of really nice UI changes here, so you can quickly go to and see which perks are affecting this stat, so you can pick those perks if you want them. And now some of the perks in the game will even open up new slots for Cyberware. But separately, Cyberware now also dictates your armor. Cyberware really is your armor now. Specifically skeletal and integumentary. Is that real? That's a real word, integumentary? So both of those sections really have the focus on boosting your armor stats, and now clothing is largely cosmetic only. This is a bit of a weird one in that it is truly just largely cosmetic only. There are some pieces of clothing that do have bonuses tied to them, but this is relatively rare. And the vast majority of the time, your defensive stats are going to come from your perks or your Cyberware now, so you can pretty much dress however you like. Getting your Cyberware installed will now come with this brief animation, as well as there's a bunch of other features around this. Different types of Cyberware can be attuned to different attributes. So if you have intelligence attuned Cyberware, you'll get even more bonuses from it if you do have a high intelligence attribute, and this can apply to a variety of the attributes in the game. It seems like these attuned stats will pop up more at the higher tiers of Cyberware, as well as things like ARM Cyberware mods are no longer a thing at all. You'll notice now with each of the different types of ARM Cyberware, like whether it's thermal or electric, many of those will actually also tie to a certain attribute and get bonuses dependent on which attribute they're associated with. As well, Cyberware can be upgraded just like all the other weapons in the game to increase some of the bonuses it'll give you. And this means you could finally start to get legendary variants of some of the leg and arm Cyberware that you previously couldn't. Like many of the other things in Cyberpunk 2077, many of the icons, bonuses, and even just fundamental benefits of the individual pieces of Cyberware have been completely overhauled. So a lot of this is going to work very differently now. Some of the Cyberware is new, while other Cyberware has been overhauled so comprehensively that it just feels new. Crafting has also gotten some fundamental overhauls. The perk requirements to craft higher level gear have largely been removed from the game. In general, there's only like 2 crafting perks at all now compared to it having a full perk tree before. But that doesn't mean crafting's quite as easy, as the component costs have gone up quite significantly and crafting components have become a bit different. Vendors are no longer going to sell you crafting components, and it seems like the only way you can consistently get these now is by breaking down gear, which means enemy loot is now very valuable if you want to get into crafting, but thankfully it is simplified. All of the gear in the game now has a tier associated with it, so it could be tier 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and if you break down that piece of gear, it'll give you the same tier of crafting components. So a tier 4 weapon will break down into tier 4 components. And now when you're upgrading or crafting something, you just need that singular tier of component. So to make a tier 5 weapon, all you need are a bunch of tier 5 components. And while you can still craft most weapons at these various levels, upgrading has been changed. Only iconic weapons can be upgraded now. And this will follow a fairly straightforward path of being tier 3, then tier 3 plus, and then tier 4 plus, and so on. And this is pretty nice across the game because fairly easily and at a glance, you can see what level a lot of your equipment is and if you need to start replacing it. And with this, there was a bit of a rework to how weapon mods are crafted. Instead of now it requiring components, it'll just require 2 lower tier copies of that same mod. So with patch 2.0, crafting was quite fundamentally changed. At a first glance, it definitely seems like it was a heavy nerf, but we'll need more time to fully explore that. But honestly, there were some even further reaching changes with weapons and loot overall. There's some new loot, as new ability increasing shards will drop. You can now find shards that will increase some of your skills or even other things like increasing your health carrying capacity or even cyberware capacity. Typically this is fairly minor, just giving you a little bit of experience or giving you a couple of extra points for any of those stats, but it still is kind of cool. You'll dynamically have these increasing just by playing the game and looting enemies. Loot overall will scale to your level now, but NPCs will no longer drop any clothing items, so you can only find those from vendors or in containers. And even at vendors, you can now preview items on your character, which is a really nice change, but also just a ton of new loot. Many of the weapon mods in the game have been fundamentally reworked to be overhauled or just have new abilities altogether. But there's one very major consideration with all of this, and that is if you attach a mod to your weapon, you can never remove it. This is definitely one of those stranger choices to me. I imagine this is going to be modded out almost immediately, but yeah, weapon mods are permanent now. So be careful, especially when attaching lower tier mods to very high tier weapons. As well as many of the iconic weapons in the game have also been reworked. Iconic weapons will rarely have any mod slots associated with them. They might have a scope and a muzzle, but outside of that, there's normally not any mod slots, but they become a bit more defined. Many of the abilities associated with iconic weapons, which are the unique weapons in Cyberpunk, are a bit more out there, like it being burst fire as opposed to the regular version of that gun just being single shot. So a lot of the unique weapons now feel even a bit more special and notable, and you can honestly build entire build paths around these. And just in general, I found a lot of the weapons in the game to have less mod slots available, but oftentimes they have other inbuilt stats to counteract that. Patch 2.0 includes exactly 2 new weapons. There's a bunch of new weapons coming with Phantom Liberty, and it seems like most of that new content is on the paid side, while the free update's only getting 2 things. The thermal katana is back, but also there's these new smoke grenades that seem to obscure enemy detection of you for about 12 seconds after you throw them. And combat was another system to get a ton of overhauls with this update. Enemy AI is just smarter now, and boss fights were rebalanced. A lot of times in combat, you'll find enemies using more grenades now, and even feature better reactions if you flank them. Sometimes when coming up aggressively on enemies, they would tactfully retreat to cover and try and use grenades to slow me down. But enemies also got some new abilities with this update. All of the NPCs in the game will now properly scale to your level. Previously, depending on which district you were in Night City, the scaling would be different. So in early game districts, enemies would be easier. In higher tier districts, enemies would be higher. That's no longer a thing. Enemies will just always scale directly to you. As well as you could occasionally find some higher tier enemies mixed within the rest, normally featuring some more powerful abilities on them. And quite a few enemies got new abilities with this update. Enemy netrunners can use a range of quick hacks against you. It'll no longer just be limited to overheat. And if you do use a Sandevistan around an enemy who also has a Sandevistan equipped, as you slow time, they can also move faster in your time slow. Unfortunately, this particular enemy wasn't cooperating too well. He wasn't moving all that quickly, but he is moving at full speed as he aims at me, as you could see. So overall, combat with this update is more interesting, more engaging, and a lot more fun. And then there is, of course, the massive vehicle overhaul, which is legitimately my favorite part of this update. Vehicles got a whole suite of changes here. There's high-level stuff like new sounds, many vehicles have overhauled sound profiles now, and this is a huge upgrade. But perhaps more importantly, far better handling. Vehicles overall will handle and maneuver much better than before. A lot of times in Cyberpunk previously, it almost felt like you were driving on ice, and that is almost completely gone. The only time I actually felt that was when I was using a car with big off-road tires, and that was oddly fitting. That probably wouldn't feel super good to drive on regular highway roads. But there are other upgrades like better braking, as well as a bunch of tune overhauls to how vehicles perform in general. And for a lot of the vehicles, they got into the finer details when it came to these alterations, like changing the entire torque curve. Hop into a twin-turbo beast and you'll not only hear the valve blow off from the turbos, but you can also feel and see the turbo boost build, and acceleration increases at higher RPMs. Like, yeah, if you're into it, Cyberpunk does have a largely functional turbo threshold now, which feels amazing. A lot of people will just hit the gas and go, but I spent like a good hour and a half just messing around with this stuff, because that doesn't just apply to turbos, and if you find some supercharged cars, you will not only have that majestic supercharger whine, but also these will feature no power delay compared to turbocharged cars. But of course, all of that wasn't done on accident, as in addition to the vehicle overhauls, we also now have vehicle combat and police chases. Now if you get wanted in Night City, the police will come after you. So there's going to be 5 threat levels here, and a larger threat level will lead to the police more diligently looking for you. So right off the bat, this is just great for immersion. No more police spawning right behind you, but now they'll naturally roll up in various types of vehicles, and you can actually hack police now. And as you get to higher threat levels or higher wanted levels, police will do things like set up roadblocks to try and stop you, have their own vehicles get stronger and better, or even come with their own vehicles equipped with built-in weaponry. And at level 5, you can get some epic moments as the overhauled max tac will drop down and attack. I have literal hours of footage of just getting a wanted level and then running from the police endlessly. You could shoot at them from your car, because yes, you can now shoot from your car and they could shoot at you from their own car. But alternatively, if you really want to have fun, invest in some vehicles that have their own built-in weaponry. I don't want to spoil too much of this, but you could be full-on James Bond with 2 machine guns popping up out of your car, and you could take down everyone that stands in your way. This is that true sandbox moment for Night City that many of us have been hoping for, and for me at least, this delivered in a massive way. It was truly some of the most fun I've had since playing Phantom Liberty, which was like a week ago, but still, it was a ton of fun. And there are a variety of other pretty cool details around all of this. Different districts will get different responses. In Santo Domingo, the police will take their time, not look for you as diligently, but if you get even 1 star in downtown, they're going to get on you ASAP. If you get a wanted level out in the Badlands, Militech will show up to hunt you down, although if you do get 5 stars, MaxTac will find you no matter where you go, regardless of district. As well as there's other mechanics like shooting out enemy tires, different vehicles having different HP, and even you can have your own tire shot out or get punctured, and you will feel the loss in handling here. As you speed up while driving, your minimap will zoom out so you can see the things around you. There's going to be a few new camera positions while you're in a vehicle, so you can be a bit more zoomed in or even far more zoomed out. And there are even new ways to buy vehicles with these new auto fixer locations that'll be all around Night City. And there's just a variety of world changes here. You'll find the NCPD out patrolling around Night City, whether it be in vehicles or even on foot. Occasionally car chases will happen between enemy factions or even the NCPD. You'll stumble upon gang fights around territory borders, which really just makes Night City feel a lot more alive and lived in. And even other drivers sometimes have a bit smarter of AI with maneuvering around you. And now that you are going to be spending a ton of time in your car, there's some new radio stations to enjoy also. Impulse 99.9, 107.5 Darkstar, and featuring all new tracks made by the community is 89.7 Growl FM, and this will be hosted by DJ Ash, who is voiced by Sasha Grey. And that is Cyberpunk 2077 2.0, truly one of the biggest updates I have ever covered for a video game, and it makes this game a lot more fun. There's a lot of stuff to dive into here, so you could expect a ton more videos on this, and especially after Phantom Liberty comes out, and I can talk more about that. But until then, get subscribed and check out this video where I give you my thoughts on Phantom Liberty.